In an era when the integrity of democratic participation is under intense scrutiny, a significant legislative development demands our careful examination. The recent passage of the SAVE Act in the House stands as a landmark moment, a legislative effort that, if enacted, would impose stringent new requirements on voter registration. As the bill makes its way toward the Senate, the implications of its provisions could reshape the electoral landscape with profound consequences. At its core, the SAVE Act represents what many have characterized as a sweeping voter suppression measure. Central to the legislation is its requirement for American citizens to furnish original documentation, such as a birth certificate, a passport, or, in some cases, a real ID driver's license, in order to register, to vote. While the intention behind identity verification might be couched in appeals to election integrity, the practical outcome is a significant barrier to participation. Millions of Americans, including sizable populations within traditionally democratic constituencies, could find themselves disenfranchised by the burdens imposed by this measure. Historically, the federal government has played a leading role in expanding voting rights, often stepping in when states have imposed restrictive measures. For decades, federal initiatives have sought to ensure that the right to vote is accessible to all citizens, countering state-level policies that have sometimes limited access. In a dramatic reversal of this trend, the SAVE Act marks one of the rare occasions in which Congress is positioned to further limit voting rights, a move that underscores an ideological shift toward restricting electoral participation. A closer inspection of the bill's requirements reveals a series of challenges that would affect the most vulnerable segments of the electorate. The mandate for citizens to produce an original document to prove their status is particularly problematic. For many, securing an original birth certificate or passport is not a trivial matter. The costs associated with obtaining these documents serve as a financial hurdle, a modern equivalent of the long-banned poll tax. Consider, for instance, the plight of married women who, after legally changing their names, might find a disparity between the names on their birth certificates and other forms of identification. This administrative mismatch could render an otherwise eligible voter unable to register. Such provisions bear the unmistakable hallmark of policies designed to target specific groups, deepening divisions along gender and partisan lines. Parallel to these legislative efforts, former President Donald Trump has intensified his campaign of voter suppression through executive actions. In a recent executive order, Trump sought to impose further restrictions on voting, an action that some observers believe was intended to counterbalance any hesitations among congressional Republicans regarding the SAVE Act's passage. Trump's move can be viewed as a deliberate continuation of his long-standing fixation on undermining electoral participation by casting doubt on the legitimacy of elections. This strategy, steeped in what can best be described as election nihilism, reflects a broader pattern of attempting to shape the electoral field well in advance of upcoming contests, particularly as the political stakes for the 2026 elections come into sharper focus. The executive order, similar in spirit to the legislative effort embodied by the SAVE Act, attempts to recalibrate the balance of power in America's electoral process. Critics argue that such orders run counter to the constitutional separation of powers. By encroaching upon the domain traditionally managed by the states, namely the administration of elections, the executive branch risks upsetting a centuries-old equilibrium designed to prevent the concentration of power. The thrust behind these measures is clear: to create an electoral environment more favorable to candidates who support the agenda of those in power today. The implications are especially troubling when one considers the potential for a cascading effect, whereby once minor restrictions evolve into a comprehensive framework that curtails the fundamental right to vote. A salient component of this debate centers on the financial and logistical burdens associated with obtaining the requisite forms of identification. Passports, while an effective means of verifying citizenship, are far from ubiquitous among the general populace. Many Americans opt not to secure a passport because travel, particularly international travel, is not a regular necessity. In this light, requiring a passport for voter registration effectively imposes a cost, a tax on participation that echoes the discredited poll tax of yesteryear. Furthermore, even alternatives, such as birth certificates, carry similar drawbacks. Not only do applicants face administrative fees, but married individuals who have undergone a legal name change are at risk of encountering discrepancies between various documents. Documents. This bureaucratic impediment is emblematic of a broader strategy aimed at limiting the electorate under the guise of maintaining order and security. The political calculus behind the SAVE Act is equally revealing. By disproportionately affecting groups that tend to favour democratic candidates, namely women, young voters, and minority communities, the legislation is structured to shift the electoral advantage. Republican strategists have long argued in favour of measures that purportedly enhance election integrity, yet the mechanics of this legislation suggest a different motivation. By reducing the number of eligible voters in key demographics, the bill seeks to secure a political advantage for those currently in power. A calculated move intended to solidify control in future elections. Critics warn that this is less about safeguarding the electoral process and more about engineering an environment where only a select group of voters can exert influence. Amidst these developments, the legal challenges mounted against both the SAVE Act and Trump's executive orders have set the stage for what may become a protracted battle in the courts. Advocacy groups and legal experts are mobilizing to contest what they see as unconstitutional restrictions on voting rights. The argument hinges not only on the prohibitive requirements imposed by these measures, but also on the fundamental principle that elections should be accessible to all citizens. In challenging these provisions, opponents are calling attention to the fact that any system of government must be rooted in the principle of universal suffrage. The outcome of these legal battles could therefore have far-reaching consequences for how the nation conducts its elections. As the fight over these measures unfolds in courtrooms and legislative halls, a broader discourse emerges concerning the health of democracy in America. The tension between ensuring secure elections and protecting the right to vote is at the heart of this debate. Yet, when measures that restrict access are cloaked in rhetoric about security and integrity, the real impact is to tilt the scales in favour of those who already wield disproportionate influence. With each new provision, the barriers to participation grow, threatening to erode the very foundations of democratic practice. The message from critics is clear. These are not isolated policy proposals, but a concerted strategy to marginalise voices and consolidate power. The implications of these developments extend beyond the immediate political contest. They call into question the role of government and the responsibilities of elected officials to serve the public interest. If the principles of equality and universal participation are undermined by policies that selectively restrict voting rights, then the promise of democracy itself is at risk. It is within this context that investigative journalism plays a vital role, holding power to account and ensuring that the public is fully informed about the stakes involved. In conclusion, the passage of the SAVE Act in the House marks the beginning of a significant and controversial chapter in American electoral politics. Coupled with the executive actions taken by Donald Trump, these measures represent a coordinated effort to redefine the parameters of voter participation well in advance of the next major elections. As legal challenges mount and the debate intensifies, it is incumbent upon citizens, journalists, and policymakers alike to scrutinise these developments closely and demand a political process that is inclusive and fair. The stakes could not be higher. The integrity of our electoral system rests on the premise that every eligible citizen has an equal opportunity to participate. Efforts that compromise this principle not only undermine the legitimacy of elections, but also pose a direct threat to the health of our democracy. In this critical moment, the call for vigilant, informed engagement with our political institutions has never been more urgent. The coming months will likely determine whether these measures will endure or be dismantled in the court of public opinion and legal review. It is a battle for the future of democratic participation, one that demands our complete and unwavering attention. This investigative report is a testament to the importance of detailed, fearless journalism, in a time when the very foundations of our electoral process are being challenged. By shedding light on these legislative and executive maneuvers, we reaffirm our commitment to ensuring that every vote counts and that every voice is heard. As this story unfolds, it remains imperative that Americans stay informed and engaged, advocating for a system that upholds the timeless principles of fairness, equality, and justice.